Hi, this is the AI Storyteller. I'm Mark. Today I'm going to interpret for you the representative work of the famous American writer Hemingway, The Old Man and the Sea. Hemingway was the most legendary American writer of the early to mid-20th century. The life of a professional writer is mostly monotonous, writing on time every day, occasionally accepting interviews and participating in cultural and social activities. Except for travel, they live in one place for their entire life. Yes, this is the life of Faulkner, Hemingway's biggest competitor. It can be said that this kind of life does not arouse people's yearning. But Hemingway is different. In his life, fishing, hunting, boxing, bullfighting, and fighting revolve around writing. If Milan Kundera's saying living elsewhere is applied here, Hemingway's experience is the life that people yearn for elsewhere. This gave him an extra layer of idle temperament beyond his identity as a serious writer. This world has never lacked serious writers, and cultural idols are not rare species either, but there are not many people who can combine these two. This time I'm interpreting The Old Man and the Sea for you. It is considered Hemingway's masterpiece, and the most typical embodiment of his life attitude and literary concept. To better understand this novel, it is necessary to first understand Hemingway's personality traits and life experiences. As a writer, Hemingway's position in the literary world speaks to his works. However, as a cultural idol, Hemingway's so-called tough guy image and elegant demeanor under pressure are more or less the result of his own careful creation. Many people who have had contact with Hemingway think that he likes to exaggerate his achievements and exaggerate his experiences to achieve dramatic effects. For example, Hemingway often half-jokingly said that he liberated Paris himself. In fact, when Normandy landed, he was just watching from a distance on the boat. On the way to Paris, he threw 3 grenades into a cellar where German soldiers were hiding according to a local person he met before continuing to advance with the troops. No one knows what happened afterwards. But in letters written to others, Hemingway claimed that he had killed many Nazi soldiers and vividly described how he was shot at, how he fought back, and how he was injured. Later, even biographers recognized that Hemingway sometimes lived in his own imagination. This kind of thing is not unique. In 1934, with The Sun Also Rises and Farewell to Arms, Hemingway had already won high reputation in literature circles. Once a young literary man asked him what was the best early training for a writer. His answer was, an unhappy childhood. Indeed, many writers' childhoods can be called unhappy, which hone their sensitivity. However, Hemingway's childhood has nothing to do with unhappiness. Part 1. On July 21, 1899, Hemingway was born into a middle-class family in the suburbs of Chicago. His father was a young and promising doctor, and his mother was an independent woman. From their economic foundation to their emotional investment, Hemingway's parents were exemplary. During his childhood and adolescence, Hemingway's extracurricular activities consisted of hunting, fishing, boxing, reading, and practicing the cello. Except for practicing the cello, these were all things he loved. If you have to find some shadows in his childhood, it can only be said that he was nearsighted. Hemingway was nearsighted from an early age but refused to wear glasses. After he became famous, he also refused to wear glasses when appearing in public because he thought wearing glasses was not manly enough. Hemingway's real literary training came from his experience as a journalist. In 1917, after graduating from high school, Hemingway faced 3 life choices: go to college, work, or join the army. His father wanted him to go to college. He wanted to go to Europe to fight in the war, but he was nearsighted and failed the physical examination. In the end, he became an intern journalist, and through his uncle's connections found his first job at the Kansas Star newspaper. The newspaper required journalists to write concisely and powerfully without using outdated adjectives or slang. These characteristics were preserved in Hemingway's later works. After less than a year as an intern journalist, Hemingway became a driver for the Red Cross Battlefield Service Team and went to Europe after obtaining his parents' consent. Shortly after arriving in Europe, Hemingway was injured while performing a mission and suffered more than 200 wounds from bomb shrapnel on his legs. His first military experience ended there. Hemingway's heroic deeds on the European battlefield were reported back to the United States by local Chicago newspapers. Hemingway's vanity was thus satisfied. However, this experience also left him mentally frustrated, and for a long time he suffered from insomnia and could not sleep with the lights off. After returning to the United States, Hemingway continued his career as a journalist. He met Sherwood Anderson, who was then a well-known writer. From Anderson, Hemingway learned about predecessors such as Conrad and began paying attention to works by Virginia Woolf and James Joyce. He also turned his attention to Russia, where Dostoevsky and Tolstoy entered young Hemingway's field of vision. This allowed Hemingway to discover new literary horizons beyond the writing style of journalism, and saved him from many creative detours. Since becoming famous, Hemingway believed that he had surpassed his predecessors. He once had a conversation with Faulkner about heroes and believed that the two of them were better than most classic writers of the 19th century, and could compete with Flaubert. Whether it was confidence or arrogance, Hemingway only felt inferior to two writers, Shakespeare and Tolstoy. Anderson's guidance opened the door for Hemingway to the new world of literature, but what really allowed him to enter was his own arduous writing training. After a brief rest, Hemingway returned to Europe as a journalist. He met a large number of cultural celebrities in Paris, including Ezra Pound, who was famous for promoting younger generations, the sharp-tongued salon hostess Stein. It was her joke that created the famous title Lost Generation. However, Hemingway's time in Paris was very difficult. He had little income, no fame, and no works. After finally saving up a few stories, his manuscript was stolen. At that time, he often wrote in cafes with pencils on portable notebooks for a whole day. Regardless of how later critics and peers commented on Hemingway's works, we must admit that in Hemingway's early writing experience, we can see an artist's pursuit of art from the heart and a truly serious creative attitude. Hemingway had some criticisms of Fitzgerald, his contemporary writer. He believed that Fitzgerald catered to readers for money and did not take literature seriously enough. He attributed all this to Fitzgerald's wife Zelda until his later years, when he still believed that it was Zelda who ruined Fitzgerald because of her vanity and pursuit of ostentation. After years of effort, Hemingway finally received recognition after the publication of The Sun Also Rises in 1926. This novel was quite avant-garde at the time and made many older readers uncomfortable. Hemingway's brother once said that his parents' experience reading this novel was like nuns visiting a brothel. But it was very popular among young people at the time, and Hemingway accurately captured the spiritual landscape of the young generation who had participated in World War I. 1929, based on Hemingway's own experience, A Farewell to Arms was published, which further consolidated the writer's literary reputation. During this period, there was also one thing that had a significant impact on Hemingway, which was his father's suicide. At the end of 1928, Hemingway's father committed suicide by shooting himself at home due to his deteriorating health and failed investments. Hemingway's younger brother later recalled that Hemingway had a very complex reaction to his father's suicide. On the one hand, his father cultivated his hobbies of fishing and hunting and was his closest family member. He was very sad about his father's death. Perhaps influenced by this event, Hemingway's fame grew bigger and bigger in the 1930s. He paid more and more attention to creating a tough guy image and masculine spirit. We may see this as a psychological compensation. He wanted to make up for the shame his father's suicide brought to his family through his own behavior. Throughout the 1930s, Hemingway's most important literary achievement was his short stories. Works such as Hills Like White Elephants and The Snows of Kilimanjaro are all works that can be ranked in literary history. In these works, Hemingway pushed his style to the extreme, with concise writing like a telegram, background omissions and a lot of blank space, and a calm and distant ending. Later he used the iceberg theory to summarize his writing style. The surface meaning of the novel is like the part of the iceberg exposed on the sea surface, which only accounts for 1/8 of the total volume. The deep meaning of the story is like the main body of the iceberg hidden under the sea surface. These contents that account for the majority should be explored by readers themselves. Compared with highly acclaimed short stories, his nonfiction works and novels during this period were difficult to be successful. The two nonfiction works Death in the Afternoon and Green Hills of Africa, respectively about bullfighting and hunting, created Hemingway's public image as an adventurer who was good at hunting. However, critics generally believe that Hemingway was just repeating himself and becoming more fond of exaggeration and hyperbole. Edmund Wilson was one of the most influential critics of the last century. He believed that Green Hills of Africa was an exaggerated work, and Hemingway's attention to his public image exceeded literature itself. Regardless of the outside world's reaction, Hemingway's legendary story continued. In 1937, he went to the Spanish battlefield and once again took up his old profession as a journalist, sending back a large number of reports from the front and participating in the filming of documentaries. That same year, his novel To Have and Have Not was published, which was a transitional work for Hemingway. During this period, Hemingway's focus changed from caring about individuals to caring about society, which was also an important reason why he joined the Spanish Civil War. It was along this change that Hemingway wrote For Whom the Bell Tolls. The protagonist of this novel, Jordan, is different from the characters in his early novels. He is neither confused nor disappointed. He actively fulfills his responsibilities and puts the needs of war above personal emotions. He is a young man full of action and firm beliefs. This work on the theme of the Spanish Civil War restored Hemingway's damaged reputation and opened up new territories for his literary career. Throughout the 1940s, Hemingway's energy invested in public events far exceeded that in writing. During these 10 years, Hemingway showed more of his social responsibility as an intellectual. His tough guy image in the public eye became more stable, and the impression of the lost generation in his early years has disappeared. However, as a writer, his performance in literary creation in the 1940s was pale and did not match his increasing public influence. At the beginning, we mentioned that Faulkner was Hemingway's biggest competitor. In 1949, Faulkner won the Nobel Prize for Literature. 2 years ago, in a speech at Mississippi University, Faulkner ranked contemporary American writers and put Hemingway behind him, saying he had no courage and had never used a word that readers needed to look up in a dictionary to know its meaning. This made Hemingway very angry. How could he lack courage as a tough guy? Later, Faulkner wrote a letter explaining that lack of courage meant that Hemingway lacked experimental spirit in literary creation. His ranking was also just a momentary slip of tongue and could not be taken seriously. Hemingway was very happy after receiving the letter but still had some unresolved issues. Just a year after Faulkner won the prize, Hemingway, who had been absent from the literary world for 10 years, published his novel Across the River and Into the Trees. Was he deliberately trying to compete with Faulkner? This question is difficult to answer. But we know that Hemingway has always held himself in high regard and few contemporary writers have caught his eye. Hemingway once said in a letter to a friend that as long as he was alive, Faulkner could only maintain his good feelings after winning the Nobel Prize by drinking. Without The Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway's literary reputation might have been in jeopardy. Across the River and Into the Trees was unanimously criticized by the critics. Words like poor, hollow, and self-pitying were repeatedly used to describe his new work. The Colonel in the novel had neither the emotion of bewilderment nor the toughness of an unyielding man. He was just a veteran who complained about everything and was physically and mentally exhausted. Hemingway's pursuit of concise style presented its most significant flaw at this time: boredom and dullness. During this period, Hemingway's physical condition continued to decline, with high blood pressure and soaring weight. Everything seemed to indicate that Hemingway would be unable to reproduce his past glory, and his literature and life would inevitably decline. It was under these circumstances that Hemingway wrote The Old Man and the Sea. In 1952, this novel was published in Life magazine and sold 5.3 million copies within 48 hours. This shows that Hemingway's appeal is still there. The following year, The Old Man and the Sea won the Pulitzer Prize, and the year after that, the Swedish institution that Hemingway spoke of awarded him the Nobel Prize for Literature. This novel not only helped him regain his damaged reputation but also took him to new heights. The novel was written in just 8 weeks but had been brewing for 17 years. As early as 1935, an old Cuban fisherman told Hemingway how he caught a big marlin and how he was eaten by a shark. The following year, Hemingway wrote a communication called On the Blue Sea, which was published in a magazine called Old Master at that time. This story left a deep impression on Hemingway, who thought he would write it as a novel one day, which led to what we now read as The Old Man and the Sea. Part 2. The protagonist of the novel is Santiago, an old fisherman from a fishing village near Havana, the capital of Cuba. He has not caught a fish for 84 days and only has 3 days left to break his record. His longest period without catching a fish was 87 days. He used to have a helper named Manolin who he taught how to fish. Manolin admired Santiago and believed that he was the best fisherman. However, because they had not caught any fish for too long, Manolin's father made him join another boat. That night, Manolin came to help Santiago, who had returned empty-handed again. He brought dinner and beer for him and prepared bait for fishing the next day. When everyone else thought that Santiago was no longer capable of catching fish, only Manolin still believed in him. This situation is similar to Hemingway's own experience when everyone thought he could not write good novels anymore. The next day, Santiago went out to sea alone with a bottle of water and the bait that Manolin had prepared for him. The sea was calm and quiet. Even before dawn, Santiago started putting down bait at 40 fathoms, 75 fathoms, 100 fathoms and 125 fathoms underwater to increase the chance of catching fish. Just for your information, 1 fathom is approximately 1.85 meters. Hemingway described in detail how Santiago put down bait at different depths to imply that Santiago was an excellent fisherman and that he had just been unlucky all this time. As the sun rose from the sea surface, Santiago rowed forward slowly but steadily towards farther waters than usual. Then he saw a black albatross chasing after a school of fish and headed towards it. There he put down bait and skillfully caught a 10-pound longfin tuna, which was just the beginning of a big show. Right now, the sun has risen high and the coastline is no longer visible. You can only vaguely see the peaks on the shore, and the clouds are like snow covering the peaks. The old man stared at the fishing line, sometimes talking to himself, sometimes thinking of baseball games and Manolin. Just then, his fishing rod suddenly sank into the water. The old man reached out to pull the fishing line and gently clamped it between his right thumb and forefinger. Then he tentatively pulled it. With years of experience, he immediately understood that a big marlin was hooked 100 fathoms below the water. The old man waited patiently until he was ready with a spare fishing line and made sure that the fish was completely hooked. He shouted loudly and pulled the fishing line with all his strength, trying to pull the fish out of the sea. It was all for nothing. The fish swam away on its own, dragging the fishing boat slowly forward. From noon to dusk, from dusk to dawn, from dawn to dusk again, for a full day and a half, the old man and the fish were deadlocked. The fish could not break free from the old man's hook, and the old man could not pull the fish out of the sea. During this process, the old man was hungry and thirsty. He only brought a bottle of water when he went out to sea, and now he could only rely on freshly caught tuna and eels to satisfy his hunger. His eyes were injured at the corners, his left hand was cramping, and his back and hands were also cut by the fishing line. But he never gave up or bowed his head. He remembered that Manolin had told him that he was an extraordinary old man. He remembered when he was young and had competed with a tall black man in arm wrestling for a day and night before finally winning against him. Later everyone called him champion. At one point, the old man had also fallen asleep in a daze and dreamed that he was still a child on an African beach watching majestic lions. In the evening, the exhausted marlin finally floated to the surface of the sea. On the other side, the equally exhausted old man summoned up his last courage and pulled the fish to the side of the boat. Then he put down the fishing line, stepped on it with his foot, raised the harpoon high, used all his strength to stab it into the back of the fish's dorsal fin, and then pressed it down with his whole body weight. The big fish struggled with all its might before it died and leaped out of the sea with a huge splash when it fell back into the water. The old man won. But the fish was too big to fit in the boat. This was the first time that the old man had caught such a big fish alone. He could only tie it to the side of the boat and start his return journey. By now he was far from his usual fishing grounds, but years of experience at sea enabled him to quickly determine his return route. Soon things began to turn against him. The bloody smell of the marlin attracted sharks. More than an hour later, the first shark attacked them along the blood trail. It was a mako shark with a blue back and a silver belly. Its skin was smooth and beautiful, and its body was strong. The old man killed it with a harpoon, but it broke his harpoon and left a new wound on the marlin's body. The old man was heartbroken that the marlin had been attacked by sharks and worried about what lay ahead on their journey. At this point he recited Hemingway's most famous monologue, "A man can be destroyed but not defeated." Sure enough, one group after another of sharks came to attack them. When he saw the first shark, he still held an appreciative attitude towards them. But towards these later ones, he only had contempt and disgust because they were sharks that ate carrion. There are many interpretations of Hemingway's description of the old man's fight with sharks. One view is that Hemingway compared himself to Santiago and used fishing as a metaphor for literary creation. He compared sharks to critics and responded to critics' negative reviews of Across the River and Into the Trees. Given Hemingway's situation at that time, this interpretation is not unfounded. In fact, as long as literature exists, there will never be an end to authors' contempt chains and interest networks between authors and critics. The fight between the old man and the sharks was brutal. He used a knife first, then a short stick when the knife broke, and then an oar when the stick broke. He was defending both the marlin and his own dignity and honor. As he said, "A man can be destroyed but not defeated." Hemingway had a tough guy spirit and liked to proclaim that people had grace under pressure. Sometimes he even became tough for the sake of being tough, which made him the target of ridicule. But the emotions in this novel are quite sincere, and the theme is higher. Hemingway used extremely simple strokes to give the old man's behavior a tragic color that could be detached from specific circumstances. People can still rise up against their doomed fate, which is a heroic character that has been praised since ancient Greek times. On the third day at sea, in the early hours of the morning, the old man returned to his hut and fell into a deep sleep. In the morning, Manolin came to his hut and found the old man sleeping. The child brought him coffee, and when the old man woke up, he told him about his fishing story. Obviously, the child was not only the old man's confidant but also his successor in business, or, more precisely, the inheritor of human heroic character. That afternoon, a group of tourists arrived from town. They mistook the marlin's bones for those of a shark. On the other side of the road, the old man fell asleep again and dreamed of lions on the beach. This is actually an atypical Hemingway-style ending because it has a distinct symbolic color and emotional temperature. The lion is an image that is constantly mentioned in this novel. The old man dreamed of lions 3 times before he went out to sea, during his fishing process, and after he caught the fish. It symbolizes hope, courage, and strength. Therefore, even though the old man was already in his twilight years and no one understood him except Manolin, who mistook his fish for a shark, as long as he could still dream of lions, his strength and courage would not diminish. This is completely different from Hemingway's usual calm and detached endings. Part 3. The plot of the novel is very simple, but there is a lot of debate about its symbolic meaning. Although Hemingway himself claimed that the old man was just an old man, the sea was just the sea, and the fish was just a fish, without any symbolic meaning, sometimes the simpler things are, the richer their connotations. In addition to reading about fate, tragedy, and creative metaphors in the novel, people also try to explore the religious implications behind the text. The first thing that catches people's attention is the number 87, which is the record number of consecutive days that the old man failed to catch a fish and is mentioned many times in the novel. In Christian legend, Jesus underwent a devil's trial in the wilderness for 40 days. On this basis, Lent, which also lasts 40 days, plus 7 days before Easter called Holy Week, adds up to exactly 87 days. The old man's experience of failing to catch a fish for 87 consecutive days twice implies that humans are in a process of continuous repetition and cycles of suffering. Only by experiencing great hardships can they obtain true redemption. Just like the 3 days when the old man went out to sea, although he suffered physical and mental tests and torture, he was ultimately victorious. In addition, 3 days is also the time it took Jesus from suffering to resurrection. In his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, Hemingway said that writing is a lonely career and that excellent writers should always try things that no one has ever done or things that others have not done well. Each book should be a starting point for him to continue exploring areas that have not yet been reached. Unfortunately, after The Old Man and the Sea, Hemingway did not fulfill his promise. After winning the prize in his youngest son's words, he became an international celebrity and vulgar. He never wrote another work of fiction until he died. The Old Man and the Sea was his peak and his swan song. On the morning of July 2, 1961, Hemingway put a double-barreled shotgun in his mouth in his study and pulled the trigger with his big toe, ending his legendary life in an unusual way. He had complex feelings about his father's suicide but ended his life in the same way as his father did. If he had looked back on his life before pulling the trigger, I wonder what he would have thought. Hemingway's life and The Old Man and the Sea are roughly summarized as follows: the lost generation, tough guy spirit, grace under pressure, and iceberg theory. Lost was Hemingway's literary spirit label in his early years. It is hard to say whether he really agreed with this label now, but he soon surpassed Lost and made tough guy spirit and grace under pressure as his public image and literary expression themes. At the same time, his literary creation began to shift from focusing on individuals to social issues from the mid-1930s. The Old Man and the Sea is considered Hemingway's masterpiece and the most typical embodiment of his life attitude and literary concept. The deafening monologue "man can't be defeated, he can only be destroyed" has influenced generations of readers and demonstrated the courage and tenacity of human beings in the face of suffering and setbacks. The iceberg theory is Hemingway's most important creative concept. When he was in good condition, he used the technique of white painting to give scenes strong emotional tension and dramatic conflicts, making the novel concise but not lacking in charm. However, when he was in poor condition, his writing style would expose the shortcomings of poverty, boredom, and emptiness. Hemingway's literary life is full of legends, and it is difficult to have a definite conclusion between truth and falsehood. He said that excellent writers must constantly explore new areas, but he himself has always adhered to a style. He tried to show his tough guy spirit and grace under pressure, but eventually left this world by suicide. Faulkner once had a saying that can be called glorious failure theory. He believed that there is a perfect state in writing that no writer can achieve, but the more one tries and the more thorough one tries, the more glorious one's failure will be. In his view, Hemingway failed, but not gloriously enough. Of course, this is only Faulkner's opinion. Perhaps we can say that throughout Hemingway's life, there are countless successes. Even some of his controversial failures are stylized and have aesthetic value. He not only pushed a literary style to its extreme but also demonstrated the strength of human spirit, and will through his life and literature. Finally, let's review the key points of this issue. 1. Hemingway was originally considered the spokesperson of the lost generation, but later he turned to present himself as a tough guy. He liked to describe themes such as hunting, bullfighting, and fishing in his works. 2. After the mid to late 1930s, Hemingway began to pay attention to social issues. Throughout the 1940s, he was more involved in public events and demonstrated a sense of social responsibility and responsibility as an intellectual. 3. The Old Man and the Sea is Hemingway's last novel and is also considered his masterpiece. 4. The iceberg theory is Hemingway's most important creative principle. It often manifests as telegram-like writing, background omission, dialogue full of blanks, calm restraint, and emotionless endings. These characteristics are particularly prominent in The Old Man and the Sea and other short stories. Well, that concludes the content for this episode. If you enjoyed my video, please click like, subscribe to my channel, and share it with your friends. Thank you.